Here's the introduction written with a target of approximately 1,200 characters. The story begins with a moment that shakes the core of our shared humanity. A young black girl named Ava, full of joy and innocence, becomes the center of an unjust confrontation in a neighborhood park. The park, a sanctuary of laughter and connection, is suddenly disrupted when a police officer approaches Ava, his demeanor stern and invasive. What should have been a carefree day for Ava and her mother, Laura, takes a troubling turn. The officer's actions reflect not just an individual bias but a larger systemic issue, one that unfairly targets the vulnerable and marginalized. As fear begins to overshadow the joy of the day, a figure steps forward from the crowd, Dwayne, "The Rock" Johnson, known globally as an actor and athlete. Dwayne's presence in this moment transcends his fame. He's not there as a celebrity but as a father, a leader, and an advocate for justice. His decision to intervene becomes a defining moment, not just for Ava and her family, but for everyone witnessing the scene. It's a reminder that courage in the face of injustice can change everything. This introduction isn't just a story about a single incident. It's an invitation for all of us to reflect. How would we respond in the face of prejudice? And what does it truly mean to stand up for what is right? Stay with us as we unpack this incredible story of resilience and heroism. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the conversation below. The sun blazed brightly over the community park, its golden rays casting a warm glow over the playground. Children's laughter rang out like a melody, blending harmoniously with the chatter of families gathered for a much-needed day of relaxation. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the tempting aroma of barbecues nearby. This park was more than a recreational space. It was a haven where neighbors connected, parents unwound, and children let their imaginations run free. Among the joyful crowd was Ava, a spirited 7-year-old with boundless energy. Her curls bounced as she raced across the playground, her laughter infectious as she played a game of tag with her friends. Nearby, her mother, Laura, sat on a bench, soaking in the rare moment of peace. She watched Ava with a protective yet loving gaze, her heart swelling with pride as her daughter's carefree joy lit up the day. Everything seemed perfect, a snapshot of innocence and community. But sometimes, the most serene moments can take an unexpected and dark turn. The shift was subtle at first. A uniformed officer entered the park, his gaze scanning the crowd. The lively energy of the park seemed to dim slightly under his scrutinizing presence. Conversations softened, and a few people exchanged wary glances. It wasn't unusual to see law enforcement in public spaces, but there was something unsettling about his demeanor. The officer's attention locked onto Ava, who was blissfully unaware of the scrutiny. She continued to chase her friends, her laughter piercing through the growing tension. Slowly, he began walking toward her, his steps deliberate. Laura, sensing the change, straightened in her seat, her instincts sharpening. When the officer reached Ava, his tone was firm, almost accusing, as he questioned her presence in the park. The playful game screeched to a halt as Ava froze, confused by the sudden interrogation. Other children backed away, their faces reflecting the unease of the moment. Laura was on her feet instantly, moving toward her daughter with urgency. "What's going on here?" Laura demanded, her voice steady despite the rising anxiety. She placed herself between Ava and the officer, her protective instincts flaring. The officer glanced at her but did not immediately address her concerns, his focus still fixed on Ava. The crowd, once scattered and carefree, began to gather, their murmurs growing louder. People pulled out their phones, some recording, others simply watching, unsure of what to do. The joyful atmosphere had been replaced by a heavy silence, tension hanging thick in the air. It was in this charged moment that a figure emerged from the crowd. Dwayne, "The Rock" Johnson, who had been at the park enjoying the day with his own family, stepped forward. His towering frame and confident stride commanded attention. The murmurs grew louder as people recognized him. But this wasn't about celebrity fanfare. Dwayne's expression was calm but resolute. He approached Laura and Ava, his presence instantly diffusing some of the fear and uncertainty, placing himself between the officer and the mother-daughter duo. He exuded a sense of quiet authority. "Is there a problem here?" Dwayne asked, his deep voice measured yet firm. The officer hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by Dwayne's intervention. The crowd's attention shifted fully to the interaction, their phones now capturing not just a moment of injustice, but also the emergence of a potential hero. Laura, though still visibly shaken, seemed to draw strength from Dwayne's presence. She reached for Ava, pulling her close as if to shield her from the unfolding scene. Ava clung to her mother, her wide eyes darting between the officer and the man standing up for her. What followed was a moment that would ripple far beyond the confines of the park, in a space meant to nurture laughter and connection. A seed of confrontation had been planted, yet in that same space, a lesson about courage, accountability, and unity was about to unfold. Dwayne's simple act of stepping forward wasn't just about Ava. It was about the children watching from the playground, the parents holding their breath in anticipation, and the officer himself being reminded of the true purpose of his badge. The stage was set, the characters in place, and the story poised to deliver a powerful message. What began as an innocent day in the park was becoming a moment of reckoning, one that challenged everyone present to reflect on what it means to stand against injustice. As the tension escalated in the park, Dwayne Johnson's presence became a focal point, shifting the balance of power in an otherwise intimidating moment. His actions were neither impulsive nor aggressive. Instead, they were deliberate, measured, and deeply empathetic. This was not just about stepping into a conflict. It was about embodying the values of courage and humanity in a situation where those values were desperately needed. Dwayne's intervention started with a question, his voice steady and calm. "Is there a problem here?" It wasn't confrontational, but it demanded an answer. The officer, who moments earlier had carried an air of unchecked authority, now hesitated. The presence of a well-known public figure, and more importantly, someone who exuded confidence and purpose, disrupted his control of the situation. For the crowd, Dwayne's calm yet firm demeanor became a beacon of reassurance. Parents watching from the sidelines felt a renewed sense of safety, and the children, who had fallen silent, began to gather closer to their own families. It was a small yet powerful transformation, a reminder that one person's courage can inspire calm in the midst of chaos. For Ava and her mother, this was more than a moment of protection. Laura, though visibly shaken, seemed to draw strength from the man who now stood by her side. She straightened her posture, holding Ava close as she confronted the officer with renewed determination. Ava, clutching her mother's hand, looked up at Dwayne with a mix of awe and relief. In the eyes of a child, he wasn't just the rock, he was her hero. What made Dwayne's response so impactful wasn't just his fame or physical presence. It was the empathy behind his actions. As a father himself, he understood the vulnerability of children and the instinctive need to protect them. His decision to step in wasn't born out of a desire to challenge authority, but out of a deep commitment to safeguarding innocence. This moment prompts a question for all of us. What would we do in Dwayne's place? Heroism is often glamorized as grand, cinematic gestures, but real-life courage is quieter, more nuanced. It's found in the willingness to act when others hesitate, to speak up when silence feels safer. In our everyday lives, opportunities for courage often come in unexpected forms. It might be standing up for a colleague who's being treated unfairly, supporting a friend in need, or even addressing an uncomfortable truth in our own communities. Dwayne's actions remind us that heroism isn't reserved for the extraordinary. It's a choice we make in ordinary moments. This incident also highlights the ripple effect of courage. Dwayne's intervention didn't just protect Ava. It changed the dynamics of the entire situation. His presence gave the crowd the confidence to speak up, to film the interaction, and to hold the officer accountable. The fear that had gripped the park was replaced by a growing sense of unity and purpose. For the officer, the encounter became a moment of reckoning. Faced with Dwayne's firm, yet composed words, he found himself under the scrutiny of not just one man but an entire community. The officer attempted to justify his actions, his tone faltering as he explained his reasons for approaching Ava. But Dwayne's response was unyielding. "Your job is to protect, not intimidate." Those words, simple yet profound, became the turning point of the interaction. They served as a reminder of the responsibility that comes with authority and the accountability that society demands from those entrusted to serve and protect. This moment wasn't just about calling out injustice, it was about reshaping the narrative. Dwayne's actions reframed the incident from one of fear and division to one of hope and solidarity. He didn't just defend Ava and her mother. He reassured everyone watching that standing up for what's right is not only possible but necessary. As the officer eventually retreated, the crowd erupted in a quiet but palpable wave of relief. Some clapped, others simply nodded in appreciation. Dwayne didn't linger to bask in the attention. Instead, he turned to Laura and Ava, kneeling down to Ava's level. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice softening. Ava nodded, her small voice barely audible as she whispered, "Thank you." In that moment, Dwayne's role as a protector extended beyond the immediate confrontation. He became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in the face of systemic challenges, individual actions have the power to make a difference. This story challenges us to reflect on the kind of communities we want to build. How can we cultivate the courage to act when it's needed most? How can we support one another in moments of vulnerability? And how can we ensure that every child, like Ava, feels safe and valued in the spaces meant for their laughter and growth? Dwayne's actions that day were not about heroics in the traditional sense. They were about empathy, humanity, and the belief that no act of kindness or courage is too small. His intervention became a lesson for everyone watching, both in the park and later, as the story spread across communities and platforms. In standing up for Ava, Dwayne reminded us all that heroism isn't about strength or fame. It's about heart. And in a world where injustices can feel overwhelming, it's a reminder we need now more than ever. The moment Dwayne Johnson intervened that day in the park wasn't just a fleeting instance of courage. It was a catalyst for reflection and change. What transpired in those few minutes had a ripple effect that extended far beyond the immediate scene. The lessons learned from this real-life story are far-reaching, and they offer valuable insights into the power of community, empathy, and accountability. The crowd's reaction to Dwayne's intervention speaks volumes about the power of witnesses in moments of injustice. Today, nearly every public space is under constant surveillance, whether through the eyes of law enforcement, security cameras, or the phones in people's pockets. While some view this as an infringement of privacy, it can also serve as a powerful tool for accountability. The bystanders who filmed the confrontation in the park were not just passive observers. They were actively participating in the process of making sure the truth was seen and heard. Recording such incidents serves a vital role in holding those in positions of power accountable. In the age of social media and instant sharing, videos of injustice can amplify the voices of the vulnerable, turning isolated events into widespread calls for change. When people witness injustice, their first response shouldn't be silence or inaction. It should be to speak up, document the event, and support those who are being wronged. Bystanders in the park played an active role in making sure Ava's experience was not silenced or forgotten. This moment was also a reminder of the power of empathy. Dwayne's calm, yet firm, intervention wasn't about challenging the officer in an antagonistic way. It was about showing understanding. As a father, he understood the importance of protecting children and the responsibility adults have in ensuring their safety. This empathy wasn't just directed towards Ava and her mother, Laura. It was extended to everyone witnessing the scene. His actions conveyed a message that, in moments of tension, the strength of compassion is often what is needed to turn the tide. Empathy has the power to shift the dynamics of any situation. In this case, it shifted the energy of the crowd from one of fear and tension to one of solidarity and reassurance. When one person exhibits empathy, it often inspires others to act similarly. Dwayne's presence gave the people around him the confidence to stand tall and speak out against injustice. For Ava, his simple gesture of stepping forward was transformative. It wasn't just about protecting her in that moment. It was about making her feel safe in a world that can sometimes feel hostile. That feeling of safety and support reverberated through the crowd, leaving everyone present with a renewed sense of hope. What makes this story so powerful is that it wasn't just a lesson in individual heroism. It was a lesson in collective responsibility. Dwayne's intervention didn't erase the bias the officer had displayed, nor did it immediately change the systemic issues at play. But it sparked a larger conversation about how we can all be active participants in creating a more just and equitable society. In his decision to act, Dwayne encouraged everyone present to reflect on what they would do in similar situations. He reminded us that heroism isn't defined by grand, dramatic gestures. It's about the willingness to step forward when the moment calls for it. And when one person takes that step, it can encourage others to do the same. In the aftermath of the event, the conversation extended far beyond the park. News outlets picked up the story, and social media buzzed with discussions about bias in law enforcement and the role of the community in standing up for justice. The incident with Ava became part of a larger movement, one that seeks to address systemic inequalities and ensure that the most vulnerable are protected. Advocacy groups began using this story to highlight the need for reform, not just in law enforcement but in the way society addresses issues of race, privilege, and power. It serves as a reminder that one act of courage, one refusal to stand by in the face of injustice, can have a ripple effect that touches many lives and pushes the conversation forward. This is the true power of moments like these, the way they become the spark for change. What began as an isolated act of intervention soon became part of a broader dialogue. Dwayne Johnson's actions weren't just about defending Ava. They were about challenging the status quo and demanding a world where bias and injustice no longer go unchallenged. The park that day became a microcosm of society, where one individual's bravery could alter the trajectory of an entire conversation. For everyone watching, Dwayne's actions were a powerful reminder of the responsibility each of us carries. While it may not always be easy or convenient, standing up for what's right is essential. We all have a part to play in ensuring that every individual is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, background, or circumstance. It's not just about confronting injustice when it's glaringly obvious. It's about creating a culture where empathy and compassion are central to our interactions with one another. This story challenges us to ask ourselves how we can be more like Dwayne in our own lives, not just in times of crisis, but every day. How can we stand up for others in small, meaningful ways? How can we support those who are vulnerable, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient? It's not about waiting for a moment to be a hero. It's about being ready to act with kindness, understanding, and courage when those moments arise. The ripple effect of such actions, however small they may seem, has the potential to reshape the world. In the end, this moment in the park was not just a singular event, but a lasting lesson in what it means to stand up for justice. It reminded us that true change doesn't come from grand gestures or singular acts of heroism. It comes from a collective, ongoing commitment to empathy, accountability, and advocacy. And every one of us has the power to make that commitment. As the encounter between Dwayne Johnson and the officer continued to unfold, the situation teetered on the edge of escalation. The officer, despite the mounting tension, attempted to justify his actions. His words were defensive, shaky, and filled with a tone of authority meant to exert control. But it was here, at this critical juncture, that Dwayne's defining moment came to life. An intervention that not only shifted the power dynamic, but also set a powerful precedent for future confrontations involving injustice. It is often said that the true measure of character is revealed not in moments of comfort, but in moments of crisis. Dwayne Johnson had the opportunity to respond in many ways. He could have chosen to back away, avoid confrontation, and let the situation play out, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped into the fray, not as an observer, but as an active participant in ensuring justice was served. The officer, attempting to assert his authority, seemed to forget one crucial element, the core responsibility of his position. His job was not to intimidate, not to target innocent people based on superficial judgments or biases, but to protect and serve. Dwayne's response, when he turned to face the officer directly, was simple but profound. Your job is to protect, not intimidate. These words, calm and firm, rang out across the park, their impact reverberating far beyond the immediate situation. In that single moment, Dwayne cut through the fog of defensiveness that the officer was shrouded in. His words were a mirror, reflecting back to the officer the true essence of his duties, urging him to reconsider his actions. It was not just a rebuke, it was a challenge, a demand for accountability that placed the officer's actions under the scrutiny of a larger moral and ethical lens. The officer faltered. His position was no longer tenable. Dwayne's intervention wasn't about defying authority. It was about recalibrating what authority should look like. In this scenario, the real authority was not in the uniform or the badge, but in the moral clarity of standing up for what is right. Dwayne wasn't interested in a battle of egos or a war of words. He was focused on the human element of the situation, protecting the innocent and ensuring the well-being of a child. And in that moment, he did what was necessary to protect Ava from the potential harm that could have come from unchecked authority. It's important to note that Dwayne didn't engage in a heated exchange with the officer. He didn't raise his voice, didn't escalate the situation with force or aggression. He used his presence, his voice, and his moral compass to make his point clear. The decision to approach the officer with calm strength was one that spoke volumes. Dwayne understood that in these types of situations, anger or aggression can often cloud the message you are trying to convey. His choice to lead with clarity and calmness didn't just de-escalate the moment. It became the moment. The officer, confronted by Dwayne's unwavering stance, suddenly found himself at a crossroads. The overwhelming pressure from the situation, amplified by Dwayne's strong yet non-confrontational approach, began to force him to reconsider his actions. In the face of an undeniable truth that his role was to serve and protect, not to intimidate, he had no choice but to back down. Dwayne's intervention had created a powerful pivot point, where the officer's authority crumbled under the weight of moral accountability. But it wasn't just the officer who was being challenged in that moment. Dwayne's actions sent a message to everyone watching. The crowd that had been passive observers now had an example of what it meant to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. His actions reminded them that heroism doesn't always look like what we see in movies. Sometimes, it's about stepping up when others are too afraid or uncertain. It's about being the one to interrupt cycles of injustice, no matter how small the action may seem in the moment. This moment also served as a personal reckoning for many in the crowd. Dwayne's calm demeanor forced those witnessing the scene to ask themselves, would I have the courage to step forward in the same way? Would I be willing to risk my comfort to protect someone else? Heroism, in its truest form, is not about grandiosity, it's about acting when it matters most, regardless of the potential personal cost. Dwayne's defining moment provided a model of what that kind of action can look like. For Ava, the turning point was even more significant. As a child who had been caught in the crosshairs of authority, her world had been turned upside down in a matter of moments. The carefree joy she had experienced while playing in the park had been replaced by fear and confusion. But when Dwayne stepped in, the transformation was immediate. She could see that someone was standing up for her, someone who understood the value of protecting children and ensuring their safety. His calm intervention, his focus on her well-being, was the reassurance she needed. In that moment, she was no longer just a child caught in a difficult situation. She was a child being cared for by a protector who had made it his responsibility to keep her safe. Dwayne didn't just offer protection in a physical sense, he offered something more profound. He gave Ava the emotional and psychological security that comes with knowing someone is looking out for you when the world feels threatening. His actions weren't about grand gestures. They were about making sure that she could go back to being a child again, free from fear and judgment. As for the officer, the moment was undeniably uncomfortable, but it was also transformative. Being confronted with the unyielding moral clarity of Dwayne's words forced him to reckon with the very essence of his role as a law enforcement officer. It wasn't enough to hide behind authority. He had to confront the weight of his own biases and the consequences of his actions. For the officer, this encounter could have been a catalyst for change, if he chose to learn from it. And for those watching, it reinforced the idea that accountability doesn't come from a place of intimidation or violence. It comes from a place of humility and introspection. Dwayne's defining moment wasn't just about correcting an immediate wrong. It was about reshaping how we think about authority, accountability, and what it means to stand up for others. In a world where power dynamics are often skewed, where those in positions of authority can sometimes misuse their power, this moment was a reminder that we all have the responsibility to question those dynamics and demand better. Dwayne's response embodied the very essence of what it means to use one's privilege for good. As a public figure with immense influence, his decision to intervene in a moment of injustice sent a message that transcended the individual encounter. It wasn't about him. It was about doing what needed to be done to protect those who are vulnerable, to make sure that bias and prejudice didn't go unchecked. By choosing to step forward and assert moral clarity in the face of authority, Dwayne Johnson became a symbol for something greater than himself. He demonstrated that true strength is not measured by physical power, but by the courage to stand up against injustice when it matters most. In doing so, he provided a powerful example of how we can all use our voices and influence to make a difference in the world around us. In the end, Dwayne's defining moment wasn't just a moment of intervention. It was a call to action for each of us to evaluate how we respond to injustice and how we can be a force for change in the world. His decision to step forward when others hesitated proved that in those moments of crisis, we all have a choice to make. And in making that choice, we shape not just the outcome of a single situation, but the future of how we treat one another in society. The story of Ava, the officer, and Dwayne Johnson stands as a powerful reminder of the responsibility we all carry to ensure justice, fairness, and empathy prevail in the face of injustice. It's easy to look at such moments and view them as isolated events, one instance where a child was protected, and one act of bravery by a celebrity. But the truth is, moments like these have a much larger ripple effect, influencing not just those involved but the society at large. They offer us a chance to reflect on the way we interact with one another, the biases we carry, and the role we each play in building a better world for everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstance. Dwayne Johnson's intervention in that park, while a powerful moment in its own right, speaks to a larger truth about collective responsibility. It's not just about the heroism of one individual, but about the courage we all have the potential to show when faced with injustice. Every one of us has a role to play in creating a world that is safer, kinder, and more equitable. It's not about waiting for someone else to act. It's about each of us stepping up when the situation calls for it, whether we are witnesses, bystanders, or those directly affected by the circumstances. In the wake of this incident, it's essential to remember that building a better future is not about the occasional act of heroism. It's about the everyday commitment to empathy, accountability, and justice. The future we envision is one where children like Ava can play without fear of being wrongly targeted by authority figures, where adults can step forward without hesitation when they see wrongdoings taking place, and where communities come together not just in times of crisis, but as a proactive force for change. True change, lasting change, is never built on the actions of a single person. It is built on the collective will of people who choose to stand up for what is right. In this moment of reflection, we must ask ourselves, how can we be more like Dwayne in our everyday lives? How can we cultivate courage, compassion, and accountability in our communities and in our interactions with others? It starts with small, everyday acts of kindness and understanding. It starts with educating ourselves and those around us about systemic issues, biases, and inequalities. It begins with looking beyond our own immediate concerns and recognizing the challenges faced by others, whether those challenges are as glaring as racial profiling or as subtle as the daily microaggressions that marginalized communities face. It's also important to recognize that standing up for justice is not always easy. It requires us to be uncomfortable, to confront our own biases, and to sometimes risk personal loss or discomfort. But as Dwayne demonstrated in that park, the courage to act can transform not only a single situation, but can inspire others to act as well. When we stand up for what is right, we are not just protecting those in front of us. We are setting an example for those who may be watching, giving them the courage to speak up the next time they witness injustice. One of the most powerful lessons from Dwayne's defining moment is the importance of using our influence for good. In his case, his celebrity status and public platform made his actions visible to millions. But influence isn't confined to fame. It's about the impact we have in our everyday spheres of interaction. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a leader, or a friend, you have the ability to shape the world around you with your words, actions, and choices. Dwayne's decision to speak out in defense of Ava was not just an act of personal bravery, it was a use of his influence to challenge the status quo and demand that things be different. It shows that we all have the power to challenge injustices in our own way, using whatever platform or influence we may have. This story, while deeply personal, also illustrates the larger societal issues that continue to plague us, issues like racial profiling, systemic discrimination, and the need for reform in law enforcement. While Dwayne's intervention was significant, it is essential to acknowledge that this was not a problem solved in a single moment. Real, lasting change requires sustained effort. It involves not just reacting to incidents of injustice, but taking proactive steps to prevent them from happening in the first place. It requires structural changes in the systems that perpetuate bias, and it requires community-driven initiatives that create spaces of safety, understanding, and accountability for all. Advocacy and activism play critical roles in this process. The conversation that began with this single incident can inspire broader movements for justice and reform. It can be the spark that ignites a series of changes, be it in the way law enforcement interacts with the community, in how children are educated about their rights and safety, or in the way biases are challenged and confronted in society. The ripple effect that Dwayne's actions created is one that can continue to inspire and drive change for years to come, if we are willing to keep the conversation going and work together toward a common goal. Perhaps the most lasting impact of this incident will be seen in the ways that children like Ava, who are often on the receiving end of biases and prejudice, begin to feel empowered. When children witness acts of bravery, acts of compassion, and acts of justice, they internalize those lessons. They grow up in a world where they understand that they are worthy of protection, of respect, and of fairness. They grow up in a world where, if they are ever faced with injustice, they know there are people around them willing to step up and stand with them. This is the kind of world we must strive to build, a world where bias, prejudice, and injustice have no place. A world where empathy is the foundation of our interactions with others, where accountability is woven into the very fabric of our institutions, and where every child, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to live in peace and safety. A world where we no longer stand idly by when we see someone in need, but instead choose to act, to step forward, and to make a difference. In conclusion, Dwayne Johnson's intervention in that park was not just a moment of heroism. It was a call to action for all of us. It reminds us that we have the power to shape the world around us, to create a future where justice and compassion are not just ideals, but living, breathing principles that guide every action we take. We all have a role to play in building a better future, and it starts with the small, everyday choices we make to stand up for what is right, to protect those who need protection, and to create communities where empathy and accountability are the cornerstones of a just society. Let us take inspiration from this moment and carry it forward, because the future depends on what we do today. And together, we can make it a better one.